we're delighted to be hosting the webinar with Selce. It's something we hope to be able to organise in person in the new community hub when it opens in Bromley in March. And yeah, the hub will hopefully be another place for you guys to kind of come and get some more information about retrofitting and many other kind of green topics. Now, the reason for retrofitting, I think, is something you all know, and that's why you're here. But essentially, residential homes are one of the top 4 emitters of greenhouse gases in the UK. It becomes, a bit of a no-brainer, essentially, to look into retrofitting, mostly because it obviously reduces carbon emissions, but it helps you save money as well in the long term, improves comfort in your home and your health as well. At the moment, it's particularly topical, but obviously it reduces the worry about rising energy prices. And so it's well worth doing. And the last bit, one of the main advantages, it can improve or increase the price of your property, essentially. I know I'm preaching to the converted, but this is, one, I think, of the many reasons why you guys might be here. So we're really hoping that you're going to get a lot out of this evening. And I will pass on to the lovely Nadia and Bilqis.
Thank you so much, Emilie, for that brilliant introduction. I just wanted to say on behalf of Selce, we're really happy to host this event with Greener and Cleaner, and they've been doing a huge amount of work on sustainability and wider issues in Bromley. So really brilliant to have everyone in Bromley engaged and have them supporting retrofit and what we can do in this space. So let's get stuck straight into it. We wanted to talk about myself and Bilqis, pretty much an introduction to retrofit. So before we do that, what I'd like to find out from you guys in the chat is where everyone is at with their retrofit journey. So if you could just let us know in the chat at the minute, who has heard of the concept of retrofit before and who has never heard of it before this webinar? And I really hope most of you are of the former group rather than the latter group, because that will make my job a little bit easier. So who has heard of it? Okay, Connie's heard of it. Brilliant. Daisy has heard of it. Jill, Twirls, air source heat pumps. Okay. Maria, Emilie, brilliant. Okay, Judith hasn't heard of it. Okay, so most of you have heard of it. Nabil hasn't heard of retrofit before as well. Diana, you know of it, but you're not sure how practical it is. Michael, not sure what it involves. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here around what's the point of doing this? Why is it? Why should it happen, and how do we do it? And Amar has studied passive house. So Amar, I really hope you're going to be the expert in the chat section and answering people's questions when they've got them and helping us out on this front. So my next question for you guys is, who has, out of those of you who've heard of retrofit, who has actually gone and completed measures in their own home? And what measures is it that you have installed? So I'm not talking about things that you've thought about putting in. I'm not talking about things that you're looking at. I'm talking, got the quotes, done the work, or perhaps done it yourselves. What have we got here? So Leonie, you haven't started yet. Twirls has got an air source heat pump and solar PV installed. Brilliant. Julie F, not started yet either. Okay. Who else have we got? So Paul, you've done some stuff. Loft insulation, double glazing, air source heat pump, solar PV. Brilliant. Henry, you've got an air source heat pump. Henry, what a familiar name. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you a little bit later. And double glazing, brilliant, brilliant. So there's quite a mixture of levels. Diana, mostly loft insulation and double glazing, brilliant. Well, it's really good to see that people have got stuck into this already and have got started. So out of those people that didn't manage to answer that question because you haven't done anything yet, what are the technologies that you're most interested in, or the solutions that you're looking at right now, if you're looking at anything? Have you gone out and got quotes for anything? Have you heard of something that's sort of got you intrigued and thinking about this? Or what is it exactly that has enticed you towards this webinar? So Emilie, you're looking at wall insulation and solar panels. What else have we got? What else are people looking at imminently? So Judith, you're planning a kitchen and dining room open plan extension. So that's the perfect trigger point to be looking at retrofit and thinking about how can I make my home greener whilst I'm doing all of these works. Diana, you're looking at whole house ventilation, more loft insulation, and wondering what else you can do. Spencer's looking at replacing his conventional boiler with a heat pump, thermal storage batteries. Solid wall insulation, Paul is thinking about. And Twirls is interested to see what people think of air source heat pumps. Well, I've heard a lot of comments about them. I'm sure you'll see a lot of comments in the chat as well. And of course, we'll be finding out a bit more about how they work practically from Ian, who has installed one in his home. All right, brilliant. Thank you guys so much for participating so avidly in the chat. It's really good to see, and we want to keep that momentum up. So any questions you've got, please be dropping them in the chat. Emilie will pick them up at the end, and we will discuss them amongst the panel in our final panel discussion. So just to kick off with our introduction, I'm Nadia. I manage the Future Fit Homes program at Selce, which means I look after giving advice and information on retrofit to homeowners. And my colleague Bilqis works in the energy advice team. Bilqis, please go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Bilqis and I give energy advice in. Sorry, I can hear echo from your room. 1 second, I'm going to close the door.
I'm going to close my own door. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, so I give energy advice in English and Bengali, and we have a group of team who speak many different languages that also give energy advice. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to be talking about today is why retrofit is so important. What is the challenge that we've got to tackle here? What are some of the solutions and key technologies that you've heard about and you're going to be looking at? How can you actually start to plan a retrofit? What is the approach that we would suggest you take when you're thinking about retrofit? How we can finance this and pay for it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about who Selce are and the other areas of work that we cover. And Bilqis is going to tell you about our fuel poverty alleviation program and how that might be relevant to some of you or your neighbours. And then, of course, we're not going to leave you without practical solutions. We're going to finish off on what you can actually go and do today after this webinar now. So do stay tuned. But the first point is, why are we looking at this? Well, we know that 22% of the UK's carbon emissions come from buildings. That's excluding our emissions that are generated outside of the UK. So it doesn't include flights, but it is a huge problem that we have, and it's probably the hardest to tackle. We've come along leaps and bounds in actually tackling carbon emissions from electricity, carbon emissions from transport, but the homes section is a nut that we are yet to crack. So retrofit is really crucial to tackle this. These are the 4 separate areas that I would suggest you think about the energy efficiency of your home in. So we've got how you actually power or heat your home. where you generate energy from, how your home loses heat or the fabric efficiency of your home, generating renewable energy, and how to make the most of that. So how to use energy efficient appliances and apply some smart home technologies to make sure that everything integrates together and you really get to that point where you can say, yes, I've got a super tech home and it doesn't use that many emissions, or it doesn't create that many emissions. But we're mainly going to be focusing on the first 3 areas of this today. So, when we talk about insulation, you're going to hear about these quite a lot. I can see Emilie has just put in there, you're understanding that insulation, good insulation, including windows, is the cornerstone of retrofitting. And I would completely agree with that. Why would I agree with that? Well, actually, most of the heat we lose from our homes, we lose from the windows and doors and the loft. After that, it is the walls, and then it is the floor. So you want to think about insulating your home in that order. We'll be talking a lot about loft insulation, different types of wall insulation, dependent on what building type you have, cavity wall or solid walls, floor insulation for different types of floors, and of course, windows and draft proofing. And windows and draft proofing is probably one of the easiest ones to tackle, because these are the obvious ones. It's the gaps around your windows where you can feel the drafts coming in. It is the gaps around that letterbox that's really old and blows open when the wind is as strong as it is today outside. So there's lots to think about, but there's some really easy to reach areas as well. So don't be overwhelmed with all of the topics today. Just to run you through a little bit about our program at Selce. So we set up Future Fit Homes around about 1 year ago. And the aim of this program was to offer advice that is tailored to people's homes, because we know a lot of the advice that's out there is quite generic, but every home is really different. So you really need tailored advice. Also, someone that is trustworthy and impartial. A lot of people love to speak to their builders about things, but builders tend to have a vested interest in some aspect, whether that be that they find certain materials are easier to supply, or they just have a certain way that they like working themselves. But our team of trained advisors don't have any of those kind of vested interests, so we'll give you the straightforward picture about what your options are. We also work in partnership with a cooperative of builders and contractors called Retrofit Works. So if you're interested to get a large amount of work done, over £10,000 of work, we can refer you to this cooperative and they can get someone to manage all of those works for you. And of course, the reason that we do this is all of our surpluses go back into alleviating fuel poverty. So we've got a few different services that we run through this program. One-to-one advice that can be done either virtually, over video call, over the phone, or in the home. And that is charged at £59 an hour. Thermal imaging surveys, which are super popular, and I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail later. But if you're interested in these as a way to measure where your home is leaking heat from practically, please do book one soon, because we can only do these in the winter, so you haven't got long left to get this booked in. Energy performance certificates, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Actually, let us know in the chat who's heard of energy performance certificates before and who's actually looked at their own EPC. If you haven't heard of it, let me know that you've never heard of this. And we also do retrofit coordination. So that is supporting people who are doing a lot of works to actually manage that whole process, make sure that the builders are doing it right, make sure that the contractors who need to be in working on different areas are working on them in the right order in a way that is kind of least stressful for you guys as the homeowners. So some comments about EPCs. Someone's had one done twice in the last year. So you must have had a lot of work done to your house, Henry, to have more than one done. Julie, you've heard of it, but you don't have one. That is fine, but it is useful. So you need EPCs when you're selling or when you're renting out your home. So that's when most people have a look at them. Paul, you've looked at your EPC, pretty generic and not very informative. I agree, it's pretty generic. It's not hugely informative. It just categorizes your house into A, B, C, D, E, F, G on energy efficiency. So it is a very quick view, a very low cost view of looking at where your house is performing. But if you wanted something that's a bit more in depth, I would probably recommend a thermal imaging survey. We also obviously run these webinars, and we have a blog where you can get lots of free information and find out more about retrofit. So all of our webinars are recorded. They're available on our website for free. But if you wish to donate, you would be more than welcome to do so. So this, I really want to talk about because this has been our most popular service over the past year throughout winter, and that's the thermal imaging survey. So what you're seeing here is what happens during the survey. One of our retrofit coordinators will come to the house and they'll get out their thermal imaging camera and have a look around pretty much all of the home, but specifically the areas that you are worried about losing heat from, or you're worried to have damp issues or something similar. And what you can see in this picture here is where you've got a problem area. So we've got an external wall on the right hand side meeting the ceiling, and also another wall on the left hand side. And the cold spot, which is in dark blue, is where heat is being lost. So we can see here, if there's been insulation installed, it's not been installed very well because we've got some heat loss right around the corner of this ceiling right here. So that's something that we can identify through the thermal imaging survey, but you get with this a full report that gives you the images, and you can have the video recording of what's gone on in your home, with some recommendations and solutions to consider for the specific issues that we found. And of course, the retrofit coordinator will talk you through this all as well. These are some of the webinars that we've run in the past, and some really positive reviews, thankfully. But anyway, let's get back into retrofit. So why would you consider retrofitting your home? Well, there's a few motives. Reducing your carbon emissions is obviously the first one, and the reason that most people are here. Making your home more energy efficient, so you actually save money on your energy bills and use less energy to power it. It's always a, top of the list to save money on our bills, especially considering the news that has just come out around the increase in energy bills. But more importantly, the comfort of your building. A lot of us, I know, will sit here and will either be really, really boiling in our house, or will be really cold in our house. And that's not how it should be. If you go into a house that is well retrofitted, you will not feel that difference, that uncomfortable feeling that that many of us feel. I visited Ian's house, was it 2 weeks ago, Ian?
Yes.
And I walked in there, and honestly, it was, I didn't even think about heating or cooling or anything like that. It was just a very comfortable environment to be in. So that is a really important a reason to retrofit as well. Health. One thing that we don't think about too often as well is the air quality that is inside our homes. We talk a lot about pollution outside of our homes, from cars and from the street. The air quality inside the house is really important, especially for people that have certain health conditions, people that are elderly. If you've got really problematic areas that have damp or mold, that is going to be very damaging to your health. And finally, increasing the value of your property. I've got a question mark here because it is debated as to whether retrofit does increase the value of your property. Just out of interest in the chat, when you've gone to buy a house, have you ever looked at the EPC rating and thought, actually, I'm not going to buy this property because it's a really low EPC rating and the bills are going to cost me a lot of money? The truth is, you probably won't, and you'll probably look at the location of the house, how nice the bedrooms are, if they're nice and spacious, things like that. But more and more in the future, we are going to be thinking about energy efficiency when we're buying houses and the value of our properties. So SL has also said, I would never buy a house with an EPC below D. It seems that people are already on it, you know, more on it than me. I should probably be the same. There are a few limiting factors when we talk about retrofit. So when I say limiting factors, these are things that are going to cause constraints for you if you live in these areas or if you come across these issues. So the first one I'm going to talk about is if you live in a conservation area, if you're in a listed building, if you live near an area of outstanding natural beauty, there are going to be certain constraints that will make it harder for you to retrofit, be that not being able to replace your windows with double glazing, not being able to add external wall insulation because you're not allowed to change the look of your property. But there are also ways around it, and I'm sure Ian will talk about some of the ways around that as well. Again, planning rules and building regulations kind of fall under the same category here. Construction design and management regulations. So when you're retrofitting, especially in a big way, you need to make sure that actually everything is taken into account to make sure that the building is still going to be safe, make sure that your builders have done the right research around this. If you're doing this at a point where you're going to be doing a lot of building work, like an extension or a loft conversion, they're going to have to take these things into account anyway. It's just making sure that everything is in place. Neighbours. Who's had to deal with neighbours with any other building works that they've done? This is a hugely notorious one, isn't it? But it's something to think about when it comes to retrofit as well. I mean, these are sort of things to think about with any changes that you're making to your building. Whether you own your home or not is going to be a big factor. If you're a tenant, it is a limit because you can't make huge changes to your home without your landlord's approval, but there are still solutions out there for you. We'll talk about those a little bit later as well. Practical and technical stuff and solutions. This could be any sort of issue that might come up, but practical is going to be a big one. When we talk about deep retrofit, a lot of this stuff is going to be things that will impact how you are living at home. So it's very much workable. You can plan your retrofit around living in the home. But if you're going to be doing big things like taking up the floor, putting in underfloor insulation, putting in new windows, you really need to think about how you're going to manage all of this so that you can be comfortable in your home whilst you're having the work done. And of course, your own wishes, you know. I know a lot of people that have not wanted to put in external wall insulation because they've got beautiful plants growing up the front of their buildings and they don't want to have those plants taken down. Retrofit can look beautiful as well. It doesn't have to look like a completely modern, you know, out of the box new house to be retrofitted. It can be done in any way, shape or form to look how you like it to look. And again, I think Ian, you'll have a discussion about this a bit later as well. So how do we actually plan for retrofit? Before I get into that, Jill has rightly put a limiting factor is the cost. Completely agree. We'll touch on that in a little bit, Jill, how we can actually pay for this. So when we think about where to start with retrofit, we would suggest that you use something called a fabric first approach. A fabric first approach means let's think about how efficient our building is before we think about adding things on top of it. So before you think about putting in a heat pump, let's think about how much energy we use first and reducing that, and then we can think about adding the heat pump afterwards. The reason for that is the best energy saved is the energy that is not used, right? So reducing our energy consumption to start off with will not only reduce our bills, but it'll make it much easier in the future to add new technologies like heat pumps and retrofit. So we would suggest that if you're doing a lot of work and you get a whole house plan done, that will look at all different aspects of retrofit, from insulation to ventilation to air tightness to your personal needs and what your future is going to be looking like in that home. And it's not just everything needs to be done right now. You can plan retrofit for what you're going to do now, what you're going to do in 3 years time, what you're going to do in 5 years time and 10 years time. If you want to go into it in a lot of detail, we would really recommend that you get a retrofit coordinator on board. So someone, again, that is impartial can give you that advice. Last few kind of slides before I hand over to my colleague Bilqis to talk about some of the fuel poverty alleviation work we do and how that might be relevant. Get your installs done right. Lots of people have been in the past bitten by insulation that's been done badly, hasn't been ventilated properly, and it really leaves a bad taste in your mouth, especially when it's your own house and it impacts how you live every day. So if you're going to be working with contractors and it's really hard to find contractors, please try and find ones that you feel comfortable with, that you can trust, that you've done your research about. And just on that topic, start with your existing fabric. So if you can see obvious problems, fix the obvious problems first. If you can see damage and cracks and things like that, fix that first and then move on to what you can do in the future. So just to talk about some of the key solutions. One thing you will hear about very frequently is external wall insulation. The reason you'll hear about this so frequently is because we've got a lot of properties in Bromley that have solid walls. Now, you might know whether your property has a solid or cavity wall. Let me know in the chat, actually, who does know whether their property has a solid or cavity wall. Okay, Paul knows solid wall. Will knows cavity wall. Solid. A lot of solid walls in Bromley. Mercedes doesn't know. Okay, brilliant. So a little bit of a mixture. 1930s terraced, you don't know. How would you find out, Michael? Good question. So there are a few ways to find out if you've got a solid or a cavity wall. The first one is thinking about the age of the building. If it's an older building, it's most definitely going to have a solid wall. Cavity walls were brought in later. The cavity wall is having two walls with a gap in between them. Solid wall is having one thicker wall. The second way you can tell is from the brick pattern. Now, this is not very straightforward. It's not always an easy way to, an accurate way to tell, because there are some architects that have liked different types of brick patterns, so they've changed the brick pattern and made it look like one when it's the other. But if you can see bricks that are next to each other and there's no change in the pattern, that is probably going to be a cavity wall. If you can see a brick with one brick length and then a short brick in between that is pushed around the other way, and then a long brick and then another short brick in between that's pushed around the other way, that's probably a solid wall. So that's one thing to look out for. Another thing you can look out for is whether you have got, well, how thick the walls are. So you can look at this in your doorways, in your windowways. If the wall is under 30 centimeters, so under a ruler, it's more likely to be a solid wall. If it's over that 30 centimeter depth, it's more likely to be a cavity wall. Okay. So I can see that we are running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker. Solid external wall insulation for solid walls is great if your building is already rendered and it looks like this on the outside. So you can see here, this was the before, this was the after, doesn't really look any different. You put the insulation on the outside and you can't really tell. If you don't have render on the outside, it is going to look a little bit different. So you need to check with your planning department if that is going to be allowed. The alternative is put the insulation on the inside of the building. Problem with this is it does take a significant, or not a significant, it does take an amount of space from the inside of your home. It depends on the fabric type, how much it does take, but it could be up to 10 centimeters off of each wall. I know people that have had this done. They've said actually they didn't feel the difference in the sizes of their rooms. So you'll have to go and see one in person to judge for yourselves how much you think it's affected the wall. Underfloor insulation is another thing to think about. This is a good thing to think about when you're changing the floors or when you're putting in a new kitchen, for example, or you're taking out all the furniture. You don't want it to be too disruptive, so have a think about that at those trigger points. If you've got suspended wooden floorboards, there's a really cool piece of kit called Qbot, I think, which is a little robot. You lift a floorboard up, it goes under the floorboards, puts the insulation in and comes back out, so you don't have to take all of the floorboards up. So there's lots of different solutions there. How do you pay for this work? A few options. If you've got a healthy bank account with some savings in, it's always a good place to start, easiest place to start. Some options are looking at green mortgages. So there are a few banks that have launched green mortgages. If you're looking at buying a property that needs renovating, they will give you a preferential rate for doing green works on that property. Or you could remortgage your existing property if you've got your mortgage open on it and you have paid off a certain percentage of that mortgage. Another good option is to think about equity release. Now, this is an option for people that own their homes outright, don't necessarily have a huge income on a monthly basis. So what we usually see is pensioners will use this option. And amount of money is released from your home, which the provider takes a percentage of the equity in your home. So when you sell it, or if it's passed on through inheritance or whatever, they would have first dibs on that percentage of the home. Loans are another solution, but probably for smaller works. And then there are also some grants to think about as well. There's a lot here. I can hear Ian chuckling in the back. If that completely frightens you, and we don't want it to, but there is a lot to think about. First point is don't do nothing. Doing something is better than doing nothing. So getting started, you'll realize that actually you can do some short-term solutions. Once you start doing those, you'll find it easier and easier to see what the long-term solutions are. Go for the low-hanging fruit to start off with. Anything that's cheap is a good solution. So if your loft is not insulated, go and get that loft insulated right now. go draft hunting, go searching for the little holes and cracks around your home that you can fill up and close up those drafts and actually make it more thermally efficient. And you never know, you might start telling your neighbours that you're into retrofit, and when your birthday comes around, they get you some tubes of sealant for your birthday, and you're able to go and seal those gaps around the walls, pipes, windows and doors, because it does, every little bit does make a difference. So I'm going to pass on now to my colleague Bilqis to tell you a bit more about what we do at Selce, apart from retrofit, and how that is relevant to you guys.
Okay, so I'm just going to begin by telling you a little bit about Selce and how and when we formed. So we formed in 2014, and it was just simply a group of like-minded volunteers who came together and felt that the energy market was charging too much for gas and electricity, and they wanted to make energy more accessible for people. And our objective is to create sustainable energy and to tackle fuel poverty, as well as reduce our carbon footprint. And as this is our mission statement, is to create a low carbon future in which everyone can access affordable energy to meet their needs and has a voice in how that is produced. So because essentially we just wanted to create energy that is more inclusive to everyone. Yep. Oh yeah, before I go to the grant funding, just to talk a little bit, can we go back to the slide? Yeah, so one of the ways we help people with fuel poverty is we give advice, information and guidance about people's energy bills, help to apply for the best deals, and also discuss their energy bills with them, and also help them with their debt. And we're not affiliated with any energy suppliers, so all our information is completely impartial. Yep, and also we give out some small measures to our clients. So we give things like LED light bulbs, radiator panels, and dehumidifiers, and draft excluders, which will help to reduce their bills. Yep. Okay, so we are currently working with Warmworks to apply for the LAD funding, the Local Authority Delivery Fund, which is to apply for larger measures in your home, and the eligibility criteria is that your household income has to be less than 30,000 and your EPC rating has to be D or below. So as Nadia mentioned about your EPC rating, if you don't know your EPC rating, you can find it online on the government website. Yep. So the larger measures include wall insulation, internal, external wall insulation, and windows and floor insulation and loft insulation as well. And if you are a landlord, you can also apply for this funding for your tenants as well. Moving on. How to reach us? You can reach us directly by phoning this number, or you can reach us through Charlton Athletic Community Trust on the number here. And yeah, I guess that's how you can reach us. So you can visit our website, www.selce.org.uk. And yeah, I guess I really want to also mention that you guys can donate to us as well. I know some people already have, so thank you so much. But yeah, please do continue to donate to us. Since we've started, we've been able to help more than 7,000 households, and we've helped more than 500 households just this year. So please do donate to us so we can continue the work that we do. And it's really important that we all work together to tackle fuel poverty. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can get in touch with Nadia.
Thanks, Bilqis. I'm just going to move on, if you don't mind, really quickly to the lovely Ian, who has basically done a lot of retrofitting work on his house. So Ian, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Emilie. I'm just bringing up Ian's presentation for us here. Just bear with me 1 second. all of this, all of these Zoom events, you would have thought I'd be organised enough to get the presentations ready ahead of time. But here I am, 2 years into lockdown, and we're still fiddling about with Zoom and with presentations. So, as Emilie mentioned, we're going to go on to hear from Ian Chown, who has a zero carbon house in Bromley. And I went to have a look at your house, Ian, last week, and it was just brilliant to see this all in person. So yeah, without further ado, we will jump straight in.
So I'll move across. Hello, good evening. I'm Ian Chown. This is the estate agent's particulars of the house. It's got a nice spring blossom in it. My wife Helen and I moved here in 2018 to this house in Orpington. We moved from East Dulwich. Very typical house. We weren't planning it as a case study at all. We just liked the house. It happened to be in Orpington. It's very typical. So it's detached, Edwardian, very traditional construction. Should we move the next slide? So there we are. So what we've done, having done this slide, I thought I might change the order actually. I thought replace the gas boiler with air source heat pump I put first, then improving insulation, then put double glazing, which is a rather interesting way of looking at it. But it's a very typical suburban Edwardian house. What we've done is use reasonable measures. I use the expression without busting a gut. We haven't really done anything very radical or hair-raising. And having done it, we thought it's worth promoting it really because it's turned out very feasible without particularly aiming to be zero carbon. Next slide. So this is the issue. About a quarter of our energy, the energy use goes to heating homes, 22%, and most of that is using natural gas. But I think it's 85% of fossil fuel homes are heated by natural gas. The rest is a little bit of oil and a tiny bit of coal and coke. So going zero carbon is very simple. You just stop burning gas, switch to use electricity instead. But electricity costs traditionally at least 4 times as much as gas per kilowatt hour per unit. When we moved in, our gas was 2.8p a kilowatt hour. Electricity was 14.4 pence. We were paying 6 times more for electricity than for our gas. So we did all this despite the cost difference. The new off-gem energy caps, if you read the small print, instead of giving the cost per year, the actual cost per unit, so they're talking about 28 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity, 7 pence per kilowatt hour for gas. So gas is still going to be a quarter of the price of electricity. So how do we reduce the cost of using electricity to heat our houses instead of gas? Next slide. We can't knock everything down and start again. We've got about 25 million houses in this country, all shapes and sizes. We can build new houses to passive house standards using virtually no energy. That's 0.5% or 0.25% our housing stock each year. Meanwhile, we've got these millions of old houses, old ages. Some are historic, listed, some are in conservation areas, whereas, as Nadia said, there may be all sorts of constraints about doing radical things. But there's also things we can use using affordable and reasonable measures for all sorts of houses. So what we did do, in a particular order, we replaced the gas boiler with an electric heat pump. This is an air source heat pump, not a ground source, so we didn't have to dig up the garden and lay lots of pipes. We increased a lot of insulation as much as possible where it was reasonable to do so. In some places we did, in some places we didn't. We completed the double glazing of all the windows. We put an electric oven in, electric cooker with a nice whizzy induction hob top. One thing I forgot to mention, LED light bulbs, which is one of the obvious. There's a real low-hanging fruit. Just go out tomorrow and buy new light bulbs from Tesco's. They pay for themselves within a year. An LED bulb uses about 1/8 of the cost of a tungsten bulb. So even if electricity doubles in price, it's still going to be 1/4 of the amount of electricity that a tungsten bulb uses. And also, of course, choosing low energy fittings. But today's more about the house structure really, rather than what you kitchen out with. It's always worth looking at the energy rating of everything you buy. So next slide. So this is the thing. This is the heat pump. You've all got one already. It's got a fridge. You've got one in your kitchen. full of tomatoes and fish fingers. This one, instead of being in the kitchen, is parked outside the house. Uses exactly the same principle. The heat pump doesn't burn electricity to create energy. It uses electricity to move heat. So what a fridge does is pumps heat uphill from a cold place, the inside of your fridge or chiller box, into your kitchen, which is why the colours at the back are warm. The heat pump takes heat out of the external air and pumps it into the house via pipes, just a couple of flow and return hot water pipes. You have to be 6 inches away from the house, so there's air around it, and you have preferably a bit of a gap. Ideally, they'd be on the back wall, but ours is on the side wall facing the neighbour, and that hasn't been a problem at all. Helen, my wife, was worried about whether it would be noisy. I can confirm it whispers slowly to itself. It's completely inaudible. The neighbours haven't heard it, and with passing cars, it's totally inaudible. The technology dates from the 19th century, really. So domestic fridges came into their own in the 1910s, 1920s. The Norwegians are all using heat pumps. Scandinavia uses it where the temperature gets much colder than Orpington in the winter. And the Germans apparently are now installing more air source heat pumps than gas boilers. They're way ahead of us. The technology is really simple. You don't have to dig a hole in the garden. You park it next to the house and you plumb it in. We asked them if they needed a special concrete base for the thing. They said, no, you just put it on the crazy baby, tighten up the legs to get it level. There's 2 pipe connections into the house, which just replaced the 2 pipe connections from the old gas boiler. Electric cable. There's no flue. There's no gas. It took about a day to install and another day to finish the whole job. So the practicalities were very straightforward. Also, I must mention, it also heats hot water. The one thing heat pumps can't do easily is replace a gas combi boiler. They don't heat hot water instantly. You have to have a hot water cylinder. We had one and we just kept it. Just transferred the heat pump to what used to be the coil connected to the gas boiler, and it works absolutely perfectly. So in the morning you have a massive hot water tank full of hot water at night on a very low tariff. These are costly things, that's the trouble. They cost about £3,000 to £5,000. That's going to come down in time, but at the moment, the main problem really is the cost of buying the thing. In every other respect, it's really simple and straightforward. Well, ours is NIBE, N-I-B-E, it's a Swedish make. They're made by Vaillant, Panasonic, Mitsubishi, lots of manufacturers, but a lot of the British manufacturers haven't caught on yet. Worcester Bosch, for instance, don't make one, but there's lots made all around the world. So this happens to be the Bosch Swedish one. Next slide. Well, you do get a rather sophisticated controller. Gas boilers are very simple controllers, they just switch on and off. The gas boiler assumes the house cools down and you switch it on and heat the house up. And electric gas boilers tend to be rather large because of that. This heat pump constantly monitors the external air temperature and adjusts the temperature of the water going to the radiators. So if it's really cold outside, it'll put really hot water into the radiators, up to about 50–55 degrees. If it's, say, like today, about 8 or 10 degrees, it'll measure that and it'll send radiators to the heat to the radiators at more like 30 to 40 degrees. So it's constantly modulating to keep the same temperature. You can switch it lower at night, then your thermostatic radiator valves do the rest. They just adjust everything. So it's a sophisticated control. It's a more gentle heat than a hot water gas boiler, which is why insulation tends to be rather more important with a heat pump, because you don't want the house to cool down overnight. Gas boilers tend to be enormous because they're based on uninsulated, drafty old houses which do cool down overnight. And you have to be big enough to heat them up quickly in the morning for your breakfast. So that's the controller. Radiators. Well, there's some people say you have to put underfloor heating in to replace the radiator, which is nonsense. When we moved in, we did put some new radiators in, really, because we wanted like the look of them. We wanted some nice radiators to match the furniture. We weren't thinking of energy particularly, but they were reasonable sized, and they've been absolutely perfectly right with the heat pump in conjunction with insulation. So we didn't need to increase ours or put in underfloor heating or anything else. underfloor is very difficult and expensive in old Edwardian houses that have timber floors. It's possible, but it's costs an arm and a leg. We would have to move out while it's all put in. Okay. So, looking at the structure of the house, it's Edwardian, 1906 or so. So, like most of the houses in Victorian London, like Lewisham, Greenwich, and so on, it has 9-inch solid walls. When you get out to Orpington, up to about 1920, the houses have solid walls. After about 1920 or 30, they have cavity walls, which can be insulated easily with cavity injection. Solid walls is much more difficult. We had a roof with hardly any insulation, about 2 inches when we looked in the loft. Timber ground floor with an extremely well ventilated space with nice air bricks, so there's copious air flowing across, which stops the joist being at risk of rotting. So we want to keep that ventilation, but of course it's cold. And half of the windows have been replaced with double glazing sometime in the 1990s. So look at the solid walls. If you look on the right-hand picture, you can see the, Nadia mentioned the bonding, Flemish bond. You can see the small bricks, which indicates that it's a solid wall. And also you can measure it, it was 9 inches thick. It's a solid wall. The inside, because it's an Edwardian house, it's got nice ornamental cornices, picture rails, skirtings, architraves. We didn't want to change that. And we didn't want to change the external appearance either. So we haven't insulated the solid wall. That's the most important thing about our house, really. One thing we haven't done. It's expensive and it can be disruptive. If it's a big house, all the bedrooms have to line, or we have to change the external appearance. If it's a narrow frontage terrace house, often there isn't much outside wall. In fact, a lot of the walls are party walls. So if you're in a narrow frontage house in inner London, there's less wall to insulate anyway. So that's the thing we haven't done. What we have done, is insulate the loft. We did a loft conversion. The photograph's halfway through it, so you haven't seen this. This is the one thing we did have to. If you do a loft conversion, you don't need planning permission, but you do need building regulation approval. And this is the only bit of insulation we were actually required to do, but we wanted to do it anyway. So to comply with modern building regulations for loft, we need about 3 foot of quilt, fiberglass quilt, or about 6 inches, 150 mm, half as thickness of foam insulation board, which is twice as effective. So it needs half as much of a thickness. So we put the glass fiber quilt very simply on the horizontal sections, the remaining bits of horizontal ceiling. On the vertical sections and the sloping bits, you can see the process being done. We put in 3 layers, 2 inches thick, total of 6 inches of foam insulation board. And it's incredibly effective. It's now the warmest room in the house. And we haven't put any radiators up there at all. It just gets the heat from the rest of the house. So that complies with the modern building regulations for a loft conversion. Next one. The house has rather unusually a rather large rear extension built in the 1990s. We didn't know how well it was insulated, the ceiling, so we took the ceiling down to have a look. Just a bit of a palaver. It turned out it had about 6 inches of glass fiber, so we added another 4 inches of foam board below it. So that's actually now super insulated. It's got the equivalent of about 14 inches of quilt, and that's been very effective. Yeah, that's replastered again. So that's Brian, the builder, doing the work. There's a one-man band who did that. We did all the installation in phases. It wasn't only one fell swoop. It's taken 3 years in small chunks of time. Next one. And then the floor, as I said, it was an Edwardian house. There's a timber floor, nice air bricks around it to allow lots of ventilation onto the underfloor, which is therefore freezing cold. So we lifted the boards, put down the 4 inches of foam insulation boards between them, and then put the boards back. So this has been a palaver, but we've done it a room at a time. In fact, there's still one raw room to finish. We've got a one-man band builder to do this for us. Lifted all the floorboards, had a look at them, replaced the odd rotten one, and screwed them all back down again. So we've kept the ventilation under the floor, but it's now very well insulated floor. This is not possible. Well, it's much more difficult if you've got a concrete floor, but if you've got a solid floor with underfloor ventilation, it's a good idea to do this. It's not, I wouldn't say it's the lowest hanging fruit of all the insulation things to do, but we certainly felt it was appropriate to do in this in this house. Next one. So when we bought the house, it had half of it had been reglazed with double glazed windows in the 1990s. Half was still the original wooden windows from the 1900s. So we replaced all the remaining wooden windows with new plastic windows, which are marvellous things, really. I mean, a triumph of technology. They're very affordable these days. As long as you go for the argon filling, the 20mm air gap, they completely stop the drafts, and they look good. That's the thing. The estate agents love these. They're sexy for estate agents. So I think looking around our area, it's hard to see any houses which haven't already had UPVC windows. If you take an area like Orpington, unoccupied houses, nearly everyone's done it already. I suspect a lot haven't insulated their loft with quite so much enthusiasm, because I think estate agents never look in loft spaces really, but they do see the appearance of a house. So these windows improve the appearance of the house and are fantastically energy efficient. They'll reduce the U value of single glazing from about 6 watts per meter squared C down to about 1.5. So you save about 4.5 watts per meter squared to degree centigrade. Because if you don't dry line a solid wall, you might reduce it from say 2 to about 1. You save about 1 kilowatt per square meter C. So double glazing the windows is 4 or 5 times as effective per square meter as dry line as insulating a solid wall. So it's totally non-controversial really, except of course if you're in a conservation area, then there's all sorts of issues. But nowadays there's marvellous heritage double glazed sash windows which are in plastic, which are fabulous. We actually installed in our previous house in East Dulwich. So energy performance, it's a big house we've got, so this is one of the biggest heat pumps you can get. It's 16 kilowatt, but that's the maximum amount of heat it can bring into the house. It's not the amount of electricity it uses about a quarter of that. It has actually a factor of 3.27, this machine we've got, which means on average, to pump a kilowatt of electricity will pump 3.27 kilowatts of heat into the house. So it reduces the cost of electricity by a factor of 3.27. That's bringing the cost of electricity down to close to the cost of gas. My calculator, the house needs about 10 kilowatts to keep it warm when it's freezing outside. And of that, 3/4, 7 kilowatts is the heat loss to the walls. So if we did insulate the walls, which is the thing we haven't done, you would save a lot more of the energy that the heat uses. For comparison, the old gas boiler we took out was rated at 30 kilowatts, twice as much. And that's because gas boilers always tend to be very overrated. The house never uses anything like kilowatts. It's partly because it's heating the hot water very quickly, but mainly it's because it's oversized to heat. Assuming the house cools right down, it heats it up very quickly, and with superheated water in the radiators. So this heat pump has been absolutely fine. It's got plenty of spare capacity, and it's the biggest you can get. Our son Henry has a terrace house in East Dulwich, sorry, West Dulwich, and he's got half the size. So instead of being 4 foot tall, it's about 2 foot tall. And it's rated at 8 kilowatts. So this is one of the biggest ones you can get. And it works. Heats the hot water really well. So this morning you've had them piping hot water.
And it is really quiet. I have to say, when I visited, the sound of the road was completely drowning out the sound of the heat pump, and it was really, really quiet. I was
That's right.
surprised to see how quiet it was.
Yeah. So how much does it cost? The problem is they cost so much money, these things. I think at the moment a gas boiler costs about £1,000 to buy. A fridge costs £500. As shells for your fish fingers and everything. Heat pump costs about, a nice Swedish one, this costs about £5,000. The price needs to come down. They should cost £400 or £500. They're just the same technology as a fridge. The technology is well established, but they haven't got the economy of scale yet. So in the meantime, you need some help with the funding, which is what we got. We're one of the very few people who got the Green Homes Grant scheme. It collapsed into a shambles in April last year. Far fewer people have got it because it was so bound up with bureaucracy. But we got the grant of £5,000, which was paid up front. I understand that the government's going to reintroduce it. It's going to be called a boiler upgrade scheme, is it? Plus, from April the 1st. So there'll be another £5,000 or possibly £6,000.
It's not completely confirmed yet, so
Right,
we're
okay.
yet to hear, but around about £5,000. I mean, if anyone in the chat has any more information on that, because I know there's a lot of energy geeks here that have been following it quite closely, do let us know.
So
But yeah.
into space. Yeah, so the problem is they just cost, the box cost a lot of money to buy. Installing it was £10,000. We didn't have to replace the hot water cylinder, and we think it's, you know, it's been a good bargain, but it certainly helped having that money up front. You can also get funding through the renewable heat incentive payment, which tapers over 7 years, but that's being scrapped as well, isn't it, in March? So we're relying on you on the upfront funding that will come with the government's new boiler upgrade scheme. It's not an upgrade, it's actually to replace gas boilers with heat pumps. So running costs, next slide. Well, we almost had to do a year. We went in March last year, so we're coming up for the first 12 months. And it's looking very good, despite changing gas to electricity, which is costing much more per unit. The heat pump, with the increased installation, reduced our energy cost just over £100 per month. That's heating the house, heating the water, that's all our electricity bills, cooking, all the LED light bulbs, and charging electric car at night. It's probably going to earn about £110 per year. Of course, this is all going to double in April, but this year, I mean, house electricity prices are going up about 54%. They may go up even further. So it's bad news in terms of costs, but of course, if the cost of energy doubles, that means the cost benefit of insulation also doubles, because the benefit of insulating your loft will be twice as great if energy costs twice as much. You can save twice as much energy, well, sorry, twice as much cost. Because the cost of electricity is going to rise. And of course, energy tariffs, well, this is a nightmare. At the moment, it's all in abeyance because all the special deals have gone because the government, because of the people going for the new Ofgem rate. But we use a Octopus Go electricity rate designed actually to charge electric cars very cheaply in the middle of the night. But we also use the heat pump in the middle of the night to heat hot water. So our electricity heated hot water is unbelievably cheap because it we pay about 5 pence a kilowatt hour, and then the heat pump reduces the cost by a factor of 3 or 4, so it's a penny a kilowatt hour, which is actually much less than we were paying for gas to heat hot water. Because we've taken the gas meter out, a long story, which I won't bore you with, trying to get the service providers to remove the gas meter. So we no longer pay any gas service charge, which is £100 a year, just for the privilege of having a gas pipe before we use any. So we've saved money there. We only pay one bill. I'll say that just over £100 a month includes all of our electric costs, cooking our dinner, heating the house in hot water, lighting, the fridge, television, everything. But energy costs are going to increase very high, a very enormous amount this year, partly because the price of gas is going up. So even though our supplier claims to use no gas in generating electricity, for some obscure reason, the cost of electricity is tied by the market to the cost of gas. So gas doubles in price, or quadruples. Electricity seems to have to go the same, even though increasingly our electricity is generated by renewables, wind turbines, and solar panels, which use no gas at all. So there's an anomaly in the market at the moment that electricity prices are going up as gas prices are going up. Next. So what we also did, I'll put these on at the end really. I mean, you think we did this first, we installed solar panels as soon as we moved in really, 15 of them in 2019. And we were at that stage, we weren't planning to put in a heat pump. We didn't put in a battery, but the solar panels we used, we got the large block is a tiny feed-in tariff from the government, but mainly it reduced our electricity bills. They probably generate about £600 a year. £7,000 investment, so they're a good value. But interestingly, although they're not in any sort of mechanical way or electrical way linked, so coordinated with the heat pump, they do work extremely well. Because on days like today, for instance, when it's sunny in the morning and reasonably cold, we find the electricity generated by the solar panels will power the heat pump. So I'm proud to say for 4 hours today, between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, we didn't import any electricity to power the heat pump. This only works in the spring and the autumn. In the summer, you're generating a lot of electricity, which isn't needed with the heat pump. and in the winter there's not much sun. But together they do work. The heat pump has improved the cost benefits of the solar panels, which we had already put in. But I'll put them at the end almost as sort of an annex, rather than being something we consider essential for zero carbon. The essential thing is the heat pump, so you can cut off the gas. Solar panels, they're a bonus if you happen to have roofs that face south or southeast or southwest. The next one. And finally, we've got an electric car. So I drove in this evening. Cars are interesting because not nothing to directly do with the house or the heat pump, but we charge the sort of very low rate in the middle of the night with a low tariff electricity. And a lot of the future prospects are using the batteries in cars to assist with balancing the energy needed in houses. So you can use your car battery, charge it up on a very low tariff at times when demand are low or the sun's shining, and then use that battery to cook your dinner at times when it's when the electricity is very expensive. And apparently one Nissan Leaf will cook the dinner in 10 houses. But that's the new technology coming. It's called vehicle to grid technology, V2G. We haven't got that, but that's kind of the future. So anyway, that's sort of contributed to our changing everything to electricity. So the future is electric, and a major element to that is converting our existing housing stock to electric heating rather than gas, and principally through air source electric heat pumps.
Brilliant.
Is that okay?
Brilliant, Ian. That was really, really fantastic. And you've caused a bit of a storm in the chat. The lovely Jess from Selce has been taking notes. So prepare yourself for the panel, because there's a lot of people really interested in what you had to say with questions. What I suggest we do now is have a little comfort break for 10 minutes. And when we come back, Will Harmer, Bromley Town Councillor and Chair of the Environmental Committee, will be telling us about what the council is doing. So see you in 10. Just go make yourself a cup of tea, you know, have something bite to eat, and we'll see you at 25 past.
Thanks very much, Emilie.
Thank you. Hi again. I'm not sure if everyone is back yet. Could I ask you a favor and just put a little note in the chat or do a kind of thumbs up with a kind of reaction just to let me know if you're back. Brill. Just trying to view through the gallery to confirm that we have everyone back. And I can see Will, sorry, Will, it just took me a while to actually scroll through all the videos. So, I mean, you don't need much introduction anyway, but you've come in, you know, from Bromley Council, and I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me and having the opportunity to speak. I apologise. I've got a daughter who should be home any minute now, who's due about half an hour ago, and she's going to disturb right at the most optimal point for maximum disruption, so I apologise in advance. Just to introduce myself, my name is Will Harmer. I'm a councillor, so I don't work for the council, but I represent residents on the council, so it's a slight difference. And I represent Bromley Town Centre, which is a fascinating area for lots and lots of different reasons in this space and in other spaces. But I also chair Bromley's Environment Committee, and if any of you know local government, you'll be aware that not a decision cannot be made without someone else scrutinising it, and my role is a scrutiny function. So I support the council, the portfolio holder, the person who does make the decisions, and myself and my committee, which is a cross-party group of councillors, help to make sure that we do the best thing on the environment agenda in Bromley. But also on top of that, within Bromley, I was fortunate to move the motion in 2019 to make Bromley Council a carbon neutral borough by 2029. I just want to talk a little bit about that in the context of this before talking about the importance of retrofitting, because we cannot meet that objective as a local authority or more broadly as a borough unless we do a lot of retrofitting. So it's a really huge opportunity for us. So talk a little bit about 2029. So we set a target of 2029 to be carbon neutral as a council. Obviously, we're really aware that the council is only a small emitter of emissions in the whole borough, but what's important is it's setting us up as in a leadership role across the borough to get other people to do this as well. And it's astonishing how many people have come to us since we set our target, people who are not within the scope of Bromley Council, and said to us, we're going to match you with that 2029 target ourselves. And that's been really positive and really good. In the context of retrofitting, it's a fascinating problem for us as a local authority. So we obviously are a building, as a local authority, we have our own buildings, we have our own stock, we have facilities, we have office buildings, but we also have this role in the wider borough as well. And focusing on that first one, we've got a lot of stock, just like the rest of the borough, that's old, that is not efficient, very much like the house that you saw previously, where Mr. Chown did a fantastic job fitting it out. We've got big properties that are like that. And we're starting to make progress on reducing the impact those properties have on the environment through some really good programs. And I can see a couple of names on the list of our carbon management team, which has been in place in the council since 2008, when, if I can be completely frank, there was much less scrutiny and much less interest in this agenda than there is now. Now, when we talk about this at the council chamber, we get lots of questions and lots of interest in it, which is really exciting and really, really positive. So the steps to making Bromley Council carbon neutral are challenging. There's no doubt about it. We made a decision to switch to a renewable electricity supplier. That meant that millions of pounds of our spend could then be reinvested in renewables, which is a really positive step. But then obviously we've got a lot of challenge around heating, particularly we've got a lot of gas heating still. So we are making some progress in this space. I'm pretty confident we can hit the 2029 challenge. And there's been some really good innovations recently. I think to give an example, Orpington, I think it's Orpington Library, we implemented an air source heat pump, which is one of the first that we did as a local authority for ourselves. And we're also looking at solar photovoltaic cells on the Civic Centre for our own office buildings, which are, to be frank, not as energy efficient as we would like. So there's some things we're doing there. But the big question isn't just that, it's what we're doing for the whole borough. And this is where the challenge is much more significant. So Mr. Chown's house, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to him, is very familiar to many people who drive around Bromley. We have lots of houses that look like that. A huge number of our housing stock is EPC D rated. We've got one of the highest in London. That's because lots of houses were built over a certain period of time in our history when energy efficiency wasn't a particularly important part of the construction process. People liked their houses colder, if I can be frank, as well, than they do now. People want houses, you know, much more in the mid-20s, whereas those houses back in the day, if you looked at the average temperatures in them, were much lower. So the big challenge for us as a local authority is how do we get and how do we encourage people across the whole borough to be carbon neutral and to make their own decisions and their own investments? Because to be frank, this is way beyond something the council can do on its own. It's probably somewhere in the region of £1 billion worth of expenditure. And if I can split that then into two, there are two key challenges. The first is we have got a lot of people on lower incomes who live in poorly insulated properties, who are going to really feel the pinch from the energy prices that are going on at the moment. And that's a huge problem for us as a local authority. And there's lots of people for whom the recent price hikes are a massive, massive problem. And it's really exciting that we've taken advantage of some of the grants that have been made available through the central government to insulate properties, but this is on the whole a very small number of properties. We need to see more of that as a local authority. We need that funding from central government, and I know that Selce have done a huge amount of work there, which is really cool. And then the other bit, and this is the bit I'm also really excited about, is we are, frankly, to be blunt, a wealthy borough, and there are lots of people who are willing to invest their own money to make some of these schemes more popular. My view is that if we can encourage more people to take some of these technologies on board, then the prices will come down, the demand will increase, technologies will evolve, more people will start supplying the services. And as we're seeing with solar panels at the moment, which are coming down quite significantly in price, my view is that also if we can get more demand into not just Bromley, but across the whole of London, a lot more of these technologies will be much more affordable. And again, as Mr. Chown said, with the cost of energy going up, the kind of individual business cases that people will be making in their own homes start to become a lot more acceptable. And hopefully we can start to really see an acceleration in this. In our role as a local authority, we're doing a lot of work in particular around signposting. So I'm personally quite confident that we can meet our own target as a local authority. But then the next question is, how do we help residents? And the reality is, and I say as someone who's got a huge interest in this, it's really confusing. All the grants that are available, the grants that exist one week and then disappear the next week. I find it really, really difficult to get my head around. But there are people within the council who do know much more about this. So therefore, to that end, we're building a platform and we're building web pages that will signpost people about how they can make the best decisions. Everything that was covered before, I'm hugely confident and I'm hugely optimistic that Selce can help feed into that as well. But how do we give residents the information they need to make the right decisions and to encourage them to go down these paths as well? And it could start with the simple changes that you can make. The LED bulb one is one that resonated with me. I recently taught myself basic electrics and took out a load of GU5s with little transformers and put LED GU10s in throughout my house. Noticeable decrease in electricity bill. But how do we do more of that? And how do we encourage people to do that? I'm not suggesting that we encourage people to do home electronics or home electrics. That's probably a very bad idea. But how do we get people to have more knowledge of the opportunities that are available to them? So to that end, the council's building this portal. It's been fantastic partnering with Selce, and I think I've had quite a few chats with them now, and they're a fantastic organisation. I hope they can provide more information from us. But for me, the actual opportunity is there for Bromley to become one of the leading boroughs in London, because we have got a lot of people who are really interested and really keen to do this, and who've got the ability and means to do it. And Emilie, I know that Cleaner and Greener will be at the forefront of helping us get the message out with your hub in the Glades, which I'm looking forward to visiting. But also, I can see you just put it in there as well.
You do it, yeah.
Crossed wire there. But also as well, what we can do as a local authority to people who are interested, because unless energy prices start collapsing in the near future, which I don't see, I think this is going to become something that people really start thinking more about and trying to do. And I know that one of the things I'm doing as a local councillor, and I think it's a huge role for us as local advocates in our communities, is to take that role in and go into the community and explain what the benefits are. So I don't want to talk too long, because I'm conscious that there's probably more interesting questions that can be asked, and I'm certainly no expert on retrofitting myself, but I'm really excited about this agenda. I think it's got a huge opportunity in Bromley to move forward with the partners, with the expertise that we've got, particularly around this table. And I'm really looking forward to working not just with the people on this call. We need more than 40, 50 people on the call. We want to have the whole borough interested in this agenda. but working with all of you guys to roll this out and to make this more of a thing, more of a something that happens across the borough, and hopefully more widely as well after that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. So we're going to move on to our kind of panel, and hopefully Nadia will kind of help with this, and also the lovely Jess has been, you know, going through all the kind of questions that have come in. I know an awful lot of them will be for Ian, I think, because it just the chat went on fire at that stage. So I don't know if you want to come online, Jess, and help with the moderation.
Hello, yes, I'll just send you a message now with the questions. I'm hoping they'll paste in okay. The first, I might as well read out the first question. The other one across. So SL asked at the very beginning, is it necessary to change the windows when they do external wall insulation, particularly with bay windows?
I think that's probably a question for me. So it's hard to say. In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. You don't need to change the windows completely, but you do insulation integrates with the window to make sure that there aren't any, you know, heat losses around the edge of the window, or that there's any thermal bridging around the edge of the window. So no, you don't need to change the windows completely, but take care. I think that is the answer. Ian, have you got any sort of comments on
no,
that?
I think it just depends on the circumstances. We replaced some of our windows and not others. We didn't put external wall insulation, but I don't think it would have affected the windows directly very much. It's just the detailing of the reveals, no fundamental problem.
It's a very good question though.
Yes.
So do we have any more questions? I'm just going to have a quick look through the chat.
We have lots more actually. Would you like me to carry on reading them out, or Emily?
If you don't mind, Jess, I think you may as well.
Yep, that's no problem. So Maria, sorry, said she was worried about damp problems with cavity wall insulation.
Again, another really good point. This is a historic issue for the insulation industry. When we saw funding come out a few years ago around the Green New Deal, and there was a huge drive for lots of cavity walls to be filled, and there was a huge number of businesses that came into the industry and started working in insulation, perhaps without having the necessary training and skills required to actually do this properly. We did see a huge number of issues with damp and with poor ventilation, essentially. So the problem here is not necessarily the insulation. The problem is how the insulation has been installed. When you insulate a cavity wall, you do need to have that airflow available to make sure that there isn't after effects of condensation and damp and moisture getting stuck in that cavity. So what you've got to think about here is the technology or the fabric that you're using to insulate the building. This applies to both cavity walls and especially solid walls, because solid wall buildings are built in a very different way to cavity walls. The solid wall is meant to breathe. So you need to use an insulation that allows the wall to continue to breathe, but insulates it properly.
Can I say something about that?
Go for it.
As an architect, I have lots of experience of building in London. London is sheltered. We have a solid wall, 9-inch wall building in Orpington. We don't have weather in Orpington, really. I hope tonight we don't get storm Eustace coming over. But if you're in the Isles of Orkney or north of Scotland, penetrating rain through solid walls is a big issue, stone walls. In London, I've never come across it as a problem, either solid walls or cavity walls. I've heard there are issues with cavity fill, but I've never come across it one personally. London's very sheltered.
Yeah, so I think it's, I would agree, it's definitely something to consider, something to look out for. If you're worried about the insulation not being installed properly, First thing would be to go with an installer that you have had direct reviews from and you've been able to speak to people that have had insulation installed by them, not half a year ago, 6 months ago, you know, a year ago, actually 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, to see where how long that's lasted and if problems have occurred. Also, you can always get, you know, one of our retrofit coordinators involved to come and have a look at the installation, to look at the quotes that you're getting from installers and see what they're recommending that they put in, and that's completely flexible. It's charged at an hourly rate of £59 an hour including VAT, so it's really based on what you actually need the expert to come and look at, rather than giving you like a set price for the whole job.
That's great, thank you. And then Liz said that she was having some concerns about installing a heat pump in a tiny terraced garden, blasting cold air, and the distance from neighbours is quite tricky for her.
Installing a heat pump in a terrace house where there's limited space. Well, the one we saw on our slide here is the biggest you can get. For a terrace house, you probably need a much smaller one, 8 kilowatts. They're about 4 feet wide, 2 or 3 feet high, foot deep. They need to be spaced off 6 inches from the wall. So normally it'd be somewhere in the back elevation. You can put them down the bottom of the garden actually, as long as there's a route for the pipes. So it's just a question if there's physically a space for one, usually under a window. Our son Henry put one in his terrace house in Dulwich, and it just fitted between the 2 doors on the back. But yes, it's literally a problem. Is there space to locate it? It's about the size of a fridge.
Is there a unit inside, Ian?
Sorry.
So we saw what was outside. You've got a pump outside.
Yeah.
What do you have to house anything inside?
There's nothing inside. You just connect the 2 pipes, the flow and return, to where the old gas boiler flow and return pipes went. Okay. There's nothing additional inside at all. It's just a box.
And then if you have the water tank,
you have to have a water
already,
tank.
Then it's not additional. But if you don't have a water tank, then it is an additional thing. You
That's
need
right.
to think
If you're
about.
replacing a gas combi boiler, you need to install a gas storage hot water cylinder somewhere.
And so there was Jill who asked also if you just connected everything to your existing radiators, and what happened to the electric cables and pipes under the floor.
So I didn't quite catch that.
So what happened? Did you connect everything to your existing radiators?
Oh yes, that's right, absolutely, yes. It just replaced the gas boiler. Instead of 2 pipes coming from the boiler, there are 2 pipes coming from the heat pump. They go through a slight Clapham junction of pipework near the hot water cylinder. But we didn't have to make any changes to the pipes going to the individual radiators at all.
And the wiring for the heat pump, what happened with that? Is it under the floor or?
Yes, you just have to put a separate cable. So the switch has to be next to it, so you can switch it off in an emergency. Yeah, we have to put another miniature circuit breaker on the consumer unit and a single 4mm cable. That was no problem at all. It's just a single, just like plugging in a fridge, really.
Yeah, brilliant. There was another question on the heat pump, which was trying to work out what the seasonal coefficient of performance you were getting with your heat pump. I know you mentioned 3.27.
I did, that's right. It's an average figure quoted by the manufacturers. It actually varies enormously through the year. So that's an average figure over the year. On a day like today, when it's fairly mild, and the heat pumps, say it might be 10 degrees outside, the heat pump's producing water at about 30 to 40 degrees centigrade. The efficiency goes up. It's about five times. So it takes 1 kilowatt to pump 5 kilowatts of heat into the house. If it's minus 10 outside and you want it 20 degrees inside, the efficiency goes down a lot. It goes right down to about 2. So you need a kilowatt to pump 2 kilowatts into the house. But over the year, it varies enormously. And you'll see the daily usage goes up a lot. During the summer, it'll be past £1 a day. In the winter, it could be £10 a day. And over the whole year, it's probably £3 or £4 a day for the whole our electricity bills. So 3.27 is very much an average figure.
There were more questions around your loft insulation as well. So Leonie was asking, how can a loft conversion that is poorly insulated be insulated to a higher spec? Is there a kind of magic solution? Probably for you, Nadia.
So When was the loft conversion done would be the first question that I would have. If it was done recently, it's probably not that poorly insulated, but it sounds like she's worked out that it is poorly insulated. So what that would involve is doing exactly what Ian did in his flat roof downstairs in his extension. So a bit fiddly, take down the ceiling, have a look at what insulation's up there, add a bit more, and then put the roof
or you
ceiling
can
back
add more foam insulation on the underside of the existing plaster. It just makes, if you've got 2 inches of insulation board, it means your room's 2 inches smaller. So you could treat it like an outside solid wall.
Or replace fiberglass with the foam insulation that you were talking about if you're limited in space, I guess.
Just a question of whether there's space available, yes.
Thank you so much for that. There were loads of questions around the floor, insulating the floor as well. I got a lot of people, asking, what you did with the kind of wall and floor joints, and also, did you have to lift the skirting boards?
It's a funny business. If you're insulating between the ground floorboards, part of this is just stopping the insulation falling into the gap. So it's often just a mechanical problem, how you hold it up. And you can do it with an 8-inch quilt you get from B&Q, very cheap. You have to put netting under it, or bits of string or little brackets. With ours, we just put down boards which spanned between the little sleeper walls. So it varies from house to house. It can be a right or palaver. And but if you've got a cold floor, it's definitely something worth considering doing. It's the second. It's not so important as insulating the loft or double glazing. I think it's probably the third on the list, really.
Yes. Brilliant. Okay. The other question was around your solar panels, because you've got a 360-degree installation, so well done for that. And Martin was saying that he's interested in solar panels, but the roof is covered in moss. Will that cause performance issues? Moss.
Moss, did you say?
Moss.
Moss. Oh. I was just covered in pigeons. You can clip them on top of the existing. If it's a sloping roof, they just clip it. They're very clever. The clips just go between the new existing tiles or slates. I don't think a moss would be a problem. Our flat roof on the rear, we put these things called tilting boxes that you just buy a plastic box and you tilt the panels on them as correct spacing, and you just put gravel in to stop them blowing away in the wind. But they're really simple. You just plonk them on the roof, wire them up with a cable. That was much
perfect.
Yeah. So with the solar, one thing to think about is if your roof will need replacing within the next 15 to 25 years, you ought to do that before you put the solar panels on, because what you don't want to do is get 10 years down the line, decide the roof needs replacing, have to take the solar panels off and reinstall them.
True.
So that's something that you need to think about. If you've got a lot of moss on your roof, maybe just take a look at the shape of the roof before you install them. But the solar installer who gives you a quote will have a look at this before they do the install as well.
Great advice. The next section is around battery storage, both in relation to a heat pump and solar panels as well. So, I mean, any tips on how you made that decision, what you selected, how big they are,
Well, when we put our panels in, it was 2019, we put in 15 panels, and the installer, we discussed battery storage, because the trouble is solar panels produce their electricity when the sun shines, which tends to be around midday. So they peak between 12 noon and about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And that electricity, if you don't use it, goes back to the grid. But you cook your dinner on your posh new electric induction hob at 6 or 7 in the evening, so you don't have to buy the electricity back from the grid. So the idea of a storage is to spread the usage through the day. He said we should think about it, and we thought about it, and we didn't put one in. And in fact, when I've got the heat pump, we're using much more of the output. We're exporting much less of the output from the panels, because the output from the panels, particularly in weather like this, spring and autumn, is being used by the heat pump. So we think it was the right decision not to put in a battery. But the future is going to be these batteries in cars. I mean, we thought about putting in a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery, which would cost £10,000. Our little electric cars, you've got a 14.5 kilowatt hour battery. It came free with the car. The second hand cost £6,000. So
two birds, one stone.
yeah, the modern cars have phenomenal batteries. You buy Jaguar or something, it's 100 kilowatt hour batteries, and they're enormous. So a big challenge is to use that battery capacity to help balance the grid. That's going to be one of the future things.
It's a good tip. Don't get it in your house, drive it.
Not yet. No, we can't afford one of these new washing distance with 100,000 kilowatt batteries.
Yeah, so I think the thing to consider with batteries, and I've seen a few comments in there about different types of storage as well. So not just electrical storage, but heat storage. They're all very much options to consider. I think probably the lowest cost right now and the most common technology is the lithium ion batteries, which are electricity storage. As Ian has mentioned, probably better for homes that are using a lot of electricity, especially at night when the solar panels aren't generating. So for my home, we've got solar panels on the roof and a very small battery. The reason for that is we're not really there in the day. I'm out in the office working, and most of our energy consumption is at night, but we still wanted the solar panels to be generating that power. We don't have any parking. We don't have an electric vehicle. And we haven't done enough insulation yet to get a heat pump. So small amount of panels, small battery. And there are lots of different battery storage solutions. I would say for the other sort of solutions, like the one mentioned, the heat batteries, the costs are higher at the minute than other types of batteries. So it's definitely a space that I'll be watching over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. But it's not something that I would probably look to install now just because of the costs at the minute. That's a personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds. There's one last question for you, Michael, which was, why did you choose the heat pump? Why didn't you go for a ground source heat pump as opposed to an air one?
Well, ground source heat pumps are a similar age of technology. They're supposed to be slightly more efficient than air source. They cost a vast amount of money. They cost 2 or 3 times as much, and they're incredibly disruptive. So, and you've got to have a big garden. You didn't want to dig up the garden. So for most, if you're in a small terrace house in London, you're not going to have rolling acres you can dig up to put in a ground source heat pump. So I think air source heat pumps, although not quite as efficient as ground source, are really the option that most people would naturally go for.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm now going to move on to Will, if that's all right. And thank you so much, Ian and Nadia, for taking this live from the car. I'm
afraid. Our office closed early today, so we've been kicked out. Had to improvise.
Well, that worked really well. I am trying to find the question for you, Will, again.
That's all right.
I will find it super. Oh, yeah. So it's a question from Connie asking what the difference between a council being carbon neutral versus net zero.
I've got a feeling if I get this wrong, there's going to be 32 people who are going to know the difference here. But carbon neutral means that there are no carbon emissions from the council at all. And net zero means that emissions that you do generate can be offset. So we've made a decision as a local authority that we want to get ourselves to real zero. What I mean by that is that we don't have any emissions. But if we get to a point where it's literally impossible for us to get those final few emissions gone out of the organisation, then you can offset through various mechanisms. But as I said, our intention isn't to focus on that. I mean, we could do that today, right? We just pay money over and we could say we're carbon neutral, sorry, net zero, but that's not our intention. Our intention is to do it the proper way and to work on some of our vehicles, our properties and other sources of emissions from us as a local authority.
Perfect. The other question Connie had was, is the council actively supporting community energy groups, as this will help reach your targets?
Absolutely. So we are a small funder, a small but not insignificant funder of the hub in the Glades. And it's partly the way that this works is we have a lot of developments, obviously, across the borough. we ask developers to make contributions towards a carbon fund, a carbon management fund, and that fund is allocated towards schemes or things that we can do as a local authority that reduce carbon emissions across the borough. So it's something that we receive money from. It's part of our planning policy to request this money. So that's the first example. The second example is that we're going to be building this page to help people. As I mentioned myself, I find it very difficult to understand and navigate all of the various grants, the eligibility criteria, what they cover, what they don't cover. So we really want to make that a lot easier for people. So I mean, our carbon management team on the call, they can probably give dates around that, but that's something that's in development at the moment, and we're looking forward to that going live. And ultimately, the final bit that we also do is we have gone to central government, we've got some funding, and we're working with Selce to allocate that funding to the most appropriate homes in the borough. These typically are lower income homes, so people who can't afford these technologies themselves. And it's not a huge number. I think it's around 140 in total, and we've identified about 50 so far. But we're working with the likes of Selce to try and make that a reality and to give those homes better insulation and better all-round everything, those kind of benefits that you saw earlier, but deliver those for some of our lower income residents as well.
Brilliant. And there was one more question, which is on a similar path again from Jill, asking how the council is supporting homeowners and landlords and tenants, as well as housing associations, to make homes more energy efficient and cheaper to run.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. So we need funding from government to do this, and the LADS scheme, the LADS 2 scheme, we're a member of, we participate with, and we'll work with Selce and with other landlords. I think it's landlords as well. I'm not 100% sure about housing associations off the top of my head, but we're definitely working with organisations who can help draw people on low incomes to our attention, and then we link them up with Selce, and then we try and sort them out with some funding to make their homes warmer and cheaper to look after.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions that have come in, I think, particularly, and I don't know, Nadia, if you can answer that one, and thank you so much, Will, for your answers.
That's fine.
It's from Amar, asking, if you can use an immersion heater to make use of the excess solar panel generation.
Yeah, it's a good question. You can. The thing to remember here is when you're using electricity to heat, it does take a significant amount of power to heat. So to add on to your solar system that diverts that power to the immersion heater, when there's excess solar generation.
It's very effective. It detects any spare electricity going back to the grid and diverts it to heat your hot water tank. So it's free hot water if the sun shines. Yeah.
I guess the thing you want to remember is if you're using an immersion heater for all of your heating and you've got a gas, a gas boiler for the gas supply in your house, but you're relying on an immersion heater, it's not going to be the most sustainable thing to rely on throughout the winter, because your solar is not going to be generating when you need that hot water the most. It's
mostly on peak is very expensive, but it's just much cheaper than, much more expensive than gas. But in conjunction with the heat pump, that brings the price right down. And if you use the heat pump at night on a cheap tariff, it brings it down to well less than the cost of gas. But yes, using the mostly on peak electricity will be very expensive.
Hope that answers.
And Wells has just added something to the chat saying they've got a solar booster for the hot water that uses surplus, solar panel generated electricity, which works brilliantly in the summer, as you said. There is one last question, and then we'll call it a day. And that's back for you, Will, which was, question around what the council is doing to support the education of installers in particular.
That's a great question, and one that I've not really got an answer for. I mean, unfortunately, the council isn't itself, we don't have the ability to educate people. I guess the key thing is if you start creating demand, then you start creating the industry. I think we've estimated there's somewhere in the region of 5,000 jobs in Bromley that could be around this space, that could be around retrofitting or the provision of these technologies. So all I can say at this point is we need to take advantage of the opportunity and generate the market demand so that people want to train this. And if you've got any ideas at all about how we could facilitate that, please let me know. We're happy to take that on board as part of our overall carbon management programme.
Yeah, I guess just to add to that point, so this is something that we're looking really closely at as well at Selce, because the response has majorly been, and a lot of people who've gone to get quotes for retrofit works, is that there's just not enough installers out there to meet the demand at the minute. And all of the installers that are out there are big companies, and they're focused on grant funding schemes. They're not focused on serving homeowners and small landlords and tenants. We're working quite closely with Greenwich and Lewisham Council on developing some sort of support scheme for training and educating installers. And of course, we're going to bring in Bromley Council on these conversations as well, once we have something more developed to be able to offer. So definitely keep an eye out on this space, but it's something that at the minute will involve Greenwich University, it will involve London South East colleges and more organisations like that. So there's definitely work going on in this space, and I'm sure, you know, Bromley Council have been very supportive in this. They will get actively involved once they hear more about what might be going on over the next few months in Greenwich and Lewisham as well. So we're very much taking a South East London unified approach on this one, I think.
That's great news, and I think that's a great way to kind of end this webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you all and getting all the questions. Someone was asking about the heat imaging survey. There will be a follow-up email, I think, with the slides and also the recording. And I'm sure there will be a link to the Selce website where it's very easy to find out how to, you know, book a survey. Africa, yeah. Oh, and Nadia beat me to it, queen of multitasking. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining tonight. We hope you join us on another one, hopefully in the hub as well. The hub is there to welcome everyone for information, you know, workshops. It's a very non-judgmental place. You start somewhere. It's about doing, you know, I call it perfectly imperfect. So you come in with questions. We don't know absolutely everything, but we know plenty of people who do, like Nadia. And so, you know, we're trying to kind of demystify a lot of the stuff, you know, for you and do some of the groundwork. So come and pay us a visit. Like I say, we are doing a soft opening on the 10th, and we hope to see you there. And so a big thank you again for Selce for organising tonight. And thank you, Will and Ian and Bilqis for, and Jess as well, you know, for being part of the event.
Thank you so much, Emilie. Hope to see everyone soon.
Okay, bye guys.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.